webcast will begin in 2 minutes. We appreciate your patience.
Welcome to today's Roundtable webcast, brought to you by Hitachi Data Systems, Aerospike, and Redpoint. I'm Stephen Fagg, Director at Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Supporting Modern Applications, Data Management for Speed and Scale. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been selected during the show, you will receive an email response. Plus, one lucky viewer today will win a $100 American Express gift card. The winner will be announced at the end of the event, so stay tuned to see if it's you. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, Chuck Wenner, Senior Director of Global Technology, Unified Compute Platform at Hitachi Data Systems, Brian Bolkowski, Co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at Aerospike, and George Correado, Chief Technology Officer and Co-founder at Redpoint. For more information on our speakers today, you can click on the arrows under their headshots. Now I'm going to pass the event over to Chuck.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, wherever you may be in the country or in the world. Really like to just express my thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you all today. So, as Stephen mentioned, today's conversation is about speed and scale, and maybe even kind of, if you break this down between the three presenters today, I'm going to be kind of old school. They're going to be new school. So let me just introduce myself. Chuck Wenner. I've been in the IT industry for 29 years. Started as a sysadmin in the defense industry, and then moved to the vendor side in 1996 with Sun Microsystems, and stayed through the acquisition of Oracle, and then came to Hitachi a couple years ago. In my role here at Hitachi, I'm a corporate role, global role that is responsible kind of 50-50. My job is kind of 50-50. 50% working with customers and sales teams out in the field globally, talking about our product, getting engaged on large opportunities and strategic opportunities, and the other 50% is working on the back end with product management and engineering and support to try to drive improvements and quality of experience for our customers. So in my career, the one constant has really always been data and data management and the importance of protecting the crown jewels of the enterprise. And obviously now, with what's been happening in terms of these and I'm going to say it, but I'm going to hate saying it, but marketing always makes you say it, which is the digital transformation that a lot of our customers are going through. Now we need ubiquitous access to that data from any type of device, from any place we happen to be, and we want to keep every scrap of data that gets generated so that we can perform analysis on it to help improve the types of business opportunities we have, different revenue channels, and all that kind of stuff. So let me go to the first slide. We just had a customer advisory board this week. Actually, at Hitachi, we had about 20 customers in, and to every one of them, this is a major, major challenge for the traditional IT departments, especially for our large enterprise customers. They spend most of their time just keeping the data in a database is safe and keeping the lights on, and that's really pretty much where all the money goes as well. It costs a lot of money. And so they don't spend a lot of time modernizing or innovating those kind of data stores, those tier 1 data stores. And also, we've seen these massive spikes in the sizes and types of data, and that's not going to slow down. That's only going to speed up. We're actually on the edge of a massive data explosion. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And if you recognize that and you're prepared for it, you're going to enable your lines of business to really leverage it. So the business doesn't want to hear time frames, for enabling access to new business systems or new methods of access that exceed anything that's not expressed in terms of minutes or seconds. In fact, the business doesn't even want to pick up the phone to talk to a human. They kind of just want to enable these new services on their own through a self-service portal would be really ideal. And as we're seeing in the industry, and especially for the customers we talk to, I don't think there's a industry vertical that isn't being impacted by these kind of born in the cloud enterprises like Tesla and Airbnb and Uber and Alibaba. They're really all challenging these long established businesses, and for Hitachi, a lot of our long established customers. And so if they don't change and reinvent themselves, they're going to be left behind or go out of business. And these digital disruptors are all using analytics and mobility and social, smart connected devices, and they're transforming their operations and customer experiences and the business models. So this is really kind of the continuum of how you kind of get to that private hybrid cloud state. And if you're not one of the disruptors, you're going to be one who's faced with this dilemma. How do I get over there to the right? The path that gets you to the cloud state where services can be requested and delivered in an instant is, in many cases, most companies, they've kind of already moved the easy, obvious stuff like office automation, DevOps, test dev. That stuff's already kind of moved. But, there's one area that almost to every customer I talk to that they haven't really paid a lot of attention to yet because it's risky, is their tier 1 database environments and application spaces. These are the crown jewels of the company. It's where all the most important data resides, and a lot of them have just kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We at Hitachi, we're a diamond partner with Oracle, and we do a lot of work with Oracle. We're part of their partner network, and they recently had a partner event this summer, and by their own estimate, and just in their customer base alone, they estimate that about 80% of their customers with tier 1 workloads haven't moved them. They're sitting on bare metal provision servers, so a lot of it's sitting on RISC-based servers still, and that stuff's aging. Those things were built well, so they continue to run. And so, like I said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that has a very substantial cost. So a lot of this gear is antique, and it's really the last kind of bastion in a lot of these bigger enterprises that needs modernization. So traditional IT is really just focused here on the legacy, and these new disruptors, they come over from the right, and as they mature, they get more efficient. So what you really got to do for the long-established industries and companies is you got to do both. You just absolutely have to do both. So let's talk about some of the challenges around that and modernizing your core. customers are constantly under pressure to lower CapEx and OpEx of running these apps, and they're trying to launch new stuff with less money as well. And really, that's just to accelerate the innovation, shorten the time to market, and access to all these apps. And at the same time, you got to make sure that you're not putting the business in harm's way, and that you're protecting the data at every step, and automating IT as much as possible, because you have a limited set of resources. Now, this next slide is one that it's going to seem kind of lame and really, again, old school, but Gartner was teaching us years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, that the cost of acquisition, the hardware and the software, really is about 25% of your purchase. And really, a lot of the total cost of ownership is over here on the right, with operational IT staffing, software licensing, maintenance support, data center space, cooling, etc. But when you look at these tier 1 workloads that are running on this antique gear, that 25% really starts to become diminished over time as support costs tend to ramp in the out years, especially for older infrastructure. That 25% is going to shrink, and the total cost of ownership is going to go through the roof on the operational side. So it really is imperative that these enterprises really take a look at these tier 1 application database spaces and really start to figure out how do I modernize that infrastructure so that I can start to participate in this kind of new economy. So really, the way we view it and at a high level is there's really just 3 steps that you got to go through. Now, some of these can be painful depending on where your organization is and the age of infrastructure and the importance of the applications and databases. But the first step is really to optimize what you have. And we just talked a little bit about TCO. We have a pretty elegant, I would say, or maybe sophisticated TCO model that we work with customers on that looks at really deep, we have about 28 different categories of costs that we look at to really calculate a very pinpointed TCO. So when you understand that TCO and what that kind of legacy tier 1 infrastructure is costing you, you start to figure out very quickly how you can fund the modernization. The other thing that you got to really look at, and this is certainly, I'm sure, for the Oracle users out there, licensing is always a really hypersensitive issue, right? And so I don't always approach it as let's take a look at your license landscape and figure out how we diminish it and how we decrease that. What I like to say is let's go figure out the additional capacity you didn't know you had within your licensing envelope. So let's try not to expand the number of seats, but giving you X% more capacity to be utilized. And to do that, we got to update the platform. The next step is really virtualize these workloads. And if you do that, it's going to give you workload mobility. You're going to have a ton of efficiency gains from an operational standpoint. And then you're going to be at that kind of cloud-ready state with your tier 1 application environment. And the last step is cloudify it. And that's going to give you speed, agility, and scale. And that's really where you want to be in order to enable a lot newer and more modern business processes and open up opportunities for the lines of business. So I want to go through just a couple examples that we've worked with customers on that went through this journey and for some pretty noble payback. So in Japan, they have a lot of high-speed rail, and we're trying to build smarter transportation systems for them across these hundreds of systems with millions of sensors and thousands of outcomes. The results to a common response and then a corresponding action. You can imagine the complexity of the thousands of trains, thousands of miles of tracks, hundreds of train stations, and millions of passengers every day. And the interaction of the multitude of these systems with all that weather and signaling and ticketing, geosensors, et cetera, is creating mountains and mountains of data. So imagine, if you will, being on a train and a magnitude 9 earthquake strikes. And this actually happened in 2011 in Japan. And what we had was all these sensors and all this data, and it produced, it produced this instant response and action because we were able to correlate all those data feeds. And the result was 27 bullet trains stopped in seconds, and obviously saving a lot of lives. A magnitude 9 would be pretty scary, and I live in California, so we live under that threat all the time. So you might be intimidated, not sure what to do next. And just like these businesses like Uber, are being disrupted, how do you start? Where do you start? One of the examples I just want to touch on a little bit more here on this slide is a utility provider in Europe, about 35 million customers. And the line of business decided that they wanted to really improve how they were billing their customers for usage, and so they were going to go move to automated readers, utility readers out in the field. And so they enabled about 3 million readers, and the avalanche of data that resulted, IT wasn't ready for, because they hadn't modernized their core. And so when they tried to add capacity, they found that the cost to do that was just going to be astronomical. So they had to really kind of go back and go through the same 3 steps I talked about, which was optimizing the current workload and then moving to a virtualization platform in order to grab that data. That was also, I think that was a SAP HANA, if I'm not mistaken, and that was a real success for them. Another example of this is, and talk about kind of antiquated business models. I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with Deluxe Check up in Minnesota. Deluxe Check, you don't see a lot of people cutting checks at the grocery store. In fact, there may be some listeners out there right now that are like, "What's a check?" Okay, maybe, hopefully not, but they really realized that their business was in peril, and they were under attack from all sorts of these kind of newer, modern, born in the cloud type companies like PayPal and Venmo. And they had to do something, and so they had to shift their business model away from printing checks to providing business services. In their sector, they had a lot of contacts with small and medium-sized banks and financial institutions that they provide an online software in the cloud, or software as a service, financial services to these organizations. And they were able to do that because they had to really go modernize the core of their operations. They virtualized everything, and they offer up this service through a portal for their customers. It's a brilliant story. We're really proud of that particular customer and what they went through. It was truly groundbreaking for them. So in summary, I just want to say, again, thank you for the opportunity to talk, and what we're talking to all our customers about right now with this concept of digital transformation is really, it's simply modernizing the core of your infrastructure, the tier 1 application spaces, which are the crown jewels of your business, and get that stuff modernized, and then the business will have a better opportunity to actually achieve speed and scale for future lines of business, for tapping into untapped channels, et cetera. So with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Chuck. And now over to our next speaker today, Brian Bolkowski, co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at Aerospike.
Hi, good morning, and as Chuck said, good afternoon, or wherever you are. Aerospike is a database company, so I'm going to show you a slightly different picture of how you can modernize your infrastructure than Chuck did, but I think you'll see some very common themes. Aerospike is one of those databases, NoSQL databases, that has also been born in the cloud and born for scale as a clustered in-memory style system. Aerospike differs from a lot of other databases in that it is uniquely optimized for flash, which is to say SSD storage, as well as all-flash arrays and various different performance systems. Aerospike is primarily was used at first with advertising, internet, marketing tech applications, but we have found through the modernization that Chuck was talking about, more and more enterprises seeking to update their systems. And so I'm going to tell you today a bit about the stories that we've seen and how we have seen enterprises adopt this kind of cutting-edge and new enterprise internet technology. I think one of the best models that I have seen work practically in these environments is what Gartner calls the two-speed IT model. Now, I know that that's somewhat of a controversial model, but what I do see is that there does need to be the continued enterprise crown jewel database class that is used for transaction processing, it is used for settlement, and it has the kind of regulatory environment that you need to have. However, when you start looking at these new use cases, what you find is that there is a crushingly large load of new data that doesn't have the same kind of requirements that regulatorily constrained data has. And I'll take you through some of those. So in that case, the big picture that I think you should look at when considering the kind of modernization is to separate out which new projects can use new databases, new infrastructure, and new teams most effectively. Those teams and those projects are the ones that you will select NoSQL and should be selecting NoSQL, whether it be Oracle NoSQL, whether it's a product like Aerospike, etc. All of these products are an order of magnitude or two above what a traditional SQL database can do, and also will be amenable in many ways to the kinds of use cases such as stopping trains on a dime or finding and detecting threats in a fraud detection environment, or even settlement of trades or analysis of post-trade analytics. This is a discussion also of application environments. So let me take you through how this kind of two-speed IT has worked in the engagements that we've seen. You may ask yourself, why does anyone in a traditional enterprise, say a check processor, need millions of database transactions per second? And that is the realm that these internet and cloud infrastructures work in, transactions per second, not transactions per minute. In this environment, what we find is the case where you may have only 500 to 1,000 business transactions. That's what you see on the left here. Let's say those are card swipes. Let's say those are, in a train case, payments to get on a train or to get off of a train. And then you, however, need analytics that may be considering thousands of transactions and thousands of data points and thousands of calculations in each part of that business calculation. Those are the kinds of cases, such as fraud detection and real-time analytics, where you should be selecting a high-speed NoSQL database. Essentially, this is a form of real-time in-memory analytics, but I'm going to show you how to do it with Flash and cloud technologies in a simpler and lower-risk fashion. Part of the key to this pattern is you are going to need your own decisioning engine. That's in this drawing, in front of the NoSQL engine, and that will have the new crown jewels of your business, which are your algorithms. Gartner also talks about the algorithm economy, that the way one company succeeds in this new and business environment is by having better algorithms, which also includes better data. We know all of that from big data, but it also means putting those algorithms online quickly. Again, these are the kinds of cases where you're going to select NoSQL. It's not simply your transaction processing, which we believe should be still done with your legacy properly legally vetted databases. I think Chuck said antique gear is often used. But these new cases are going to have a front-side real-time component, but then as you see in this system, there's a separate analytics tier. And I think it is very important to think about the problem really with an operational aspect as well as an analytics back-end processing system. Those systems in the big data world, I think we're all familiar with the technology names there. They're often Hadoop stacks. They could be Teradata stacks. They could even include some of the Oracle Exadata systems. But they're used on a hour-by-hour or day-by-day or multi-day system. And they're not used on a second-by-second basis involving sensors, the most recent sensor data, or people, the most recent behavioral data if you're trying to track, say, fraud detection. So this application model should give you a map to how to apply these technologies in a safe and sane way to your enterprise. Find individual cases and individual projects within your business that need to jump over into the new world and engage with them and allow them to select the technology of the internet generation and sit them down with the analytics and your data scientists, figure out which parts of the business will benefit from being real-time oriented, and then build this kind of stack. So what are the real-world cases? If you've gotten in your mind now some of the abstract ideas of building a front-edge decision-making engine on your operational database, as well as building your analytics tier, one case that Aerospike has been involved in is advertising. It was really one of the first movers in this kind of tech stack, and it's not a traditional enterprise use case, but it should give you a picture of what actually needed to happen in the tech stack and the insights that they had. In advertising, you need to know for a given person at a given moment the most appropriate ad to place. You can look at their recent behavior, the sites they've been to, the search terms they've had, and you need to then say, among the ads that I have, among brand advertising, performance advertising, etc., what is the optimal ad? And that's what these ad tech companies do. If they were using some of the older technology stacks, the millions of ads placed per day and the thousands of calculations needed to be done for every single ad placement would simply not be practical. In this use case, you would typically need, say, 10 terabytes to 20 terabytes of that kind of frontline data. Now, similar to the two-speed IT, the fact that an ad was placed or the fact that a payment was made to an ad provider or a website still happens through a back-end database choice that is a more traditional SQL approach for all the compliance reasons that you would expect. But that real-time decisioning component on the front edge, looking at the analytics, has to be done with a NoSQL solution. Let's apply that same mental model to a fraud prevention case. Chuck mentioned PayPal, Venmo. These kinds of companies have already pioneered using this form of tech stack that has historical data. Again, that's doing pattern matching, that's finding actionable patterns. It's often training machine learning models, and then moving to a front-edge operational database that is taking into account most recent data. This isn't business process data, right? It's not the typical table and join transactional workloads, but it is an operational workload case. And you do need to have every scrap of data about every given person, and you need to move those algorithms, remember the algorithm economy, onto the front line of your application as quickly as possible. That's how you both save money by preventing fraud, but also avoid cases of customer dissatisfaction due to false positives. So again, fraud prevention companies will have a data science team. They'll start looking through their historical data, and then they'll find algorithms. They need to code those in the decision stack, but have access to, in these cases, hundreds of terabytes of real-time data. Remember also that it's fast read-write data. All of this behavioral information is flooding in and needs to take effect in the seconds that it happens, because the most recent data is the most powerful data in all of these mathematical models. So this is another system that is going to require millions of transactions per second on the front end, and thus high-speed NoSQL. Another similar case are the new workloads and demands placed on trading systems and brokerage systems. In the case of financial services companies and brokerage houses, what they need is the ability to run new novel risk calculations that are systemic, because what we now know post-2008 is that the lending risk of a brokerage firm depends on seeing not just an individual account, but also your global risk profile in a variety of models. Those models need to change and be updated and need to have your best mathematicians understanding them. Still, a lot of your settlement and back end needs to happen through the financially approved and legally approved traditional databases. So again, this is a further pattern of having a front-edge operational system that is reliable. Flash provides a lot of the persistence needed. It's not a RAM-based system. And is also business critical as well as mission critical. Moment by moment, you need to be settling trades. You need to be providing information to your mobile apps, to all of the trading people, but also running minute-by-minute risk calculations. In the case where Aerospike engaged on this particular use case, we've helped our customer get from a 24-hour risk recalculation, which was common among all of the brokerages firms a few years ago, down to every 7 minutes, they're able to do a new calculation. Even more importantly is their business now is that they have a group that is capable of doing these kinds of analysis in real time with their own technology and their own algorithms. They're no longer a follower. And that's an important aspect to remember. In the case of telecoms, there's been a great shift over the last even 2 or 3 years. If you're in North America, I'm sure you've seen that all of your telco plans and your mobile plans are now based on data volumes and not by minutes of cell phone use and voice use. After all, who uses voice anymore when you can simply chat with someone or send them an instant message, and maybe occasionally you use a voice call. When you think about the change in databases that has to occur, every telco system now has to do billing on a packet-by-packet basis. And each one of those packets, that's a data flow that is massively higher than what is needed in a call data record minute-by-minute system. So all of the telco providers and equipment providers have needed to massively update their database systems. So that should provide you with another interesting concept in how to apply this kind of two-tier system. A fast edge database, a fast operational database. In this case, it is more of a billing system. Simply, the relational systems were never designed to take that kind of load. The RAM-based systems, such as times 10, which was commonly used in this use case, are not properly cloud-enabled and not appropriate for the new kinds of hardware, as Chuck was saying earlier. A cloud-enabled system, a new style of database like Aerospike has been what many different telecom equipment providers have chosen to take on this new use case. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought. 4 different use cases that I've been involved in with individual customers that we have deployed. One from a pure behavioral standpoint, one fraud and risk that is also behavioral, but in a traditional financial services process. Another one, telco, that involves really the billing and transaction flow. So it's not a system that is a system of engagement per se, but does require, in the new age, an entirely new database and new workloads. So let me take you through for 1 second some of the hardware changes that have been responsible for allowing companies like Aerospike to provide reliability as well as this new level of performance. If you haven't been involved in flash and SSD storage, a great change has occurred just in the last year, which is called NVMe. NVMe is a physical standard of storage which is related to PCI and PCIe buses, but provides consistency across the different vendors. When you put a card in a chassis or you put a disk in the front panel of a machine, you can now count on the fact that there is a driver that has been created by the operating system and supports that drive very, very well. Prior to the innovation of NVMe, every single vendor had to write their own drivers, and frankly, it was a bit of a nightmare operationally. The fact that all of the Tier 1 flash providers, you see here Intel, Samsung, Micron, Toshiba, of course Hitachi is in the mix as well, all of these guys are creating great new flash drives that simply work out of the box and are capable of hundreds of thousands of IOPS. Now, whether you put that in a chassis, there's a number of vendors that Aerospike works with. If you prefer a fiber channel or have existing fiber channel hardware, can unlock these systems. But also, there are direct attach systems that are working at these levels of speed. Now, Aerospike, as a database being clustered and highly available, is capable of using and distributing load over these flash devices in a unique fashion, and we think it's one of our benefits. But without flash, you're still in the old economics of RAM, and you're using an old RAM-based system. One fact we have found at Aerospike is that the real bottleneck has shifted in cloud deployments to the network. When the network is your bottleneck, you might as well use flash, and in fact, RAM provides very little benefit for the operational use case. There are other use cases where RAM is still appropriate, and Aerospike is a great RAM database. But flash provides persistence, it provides also this kind of high capability of performance, but really even just in the last few years has it become operationally practical. Now that's in a bare metal environment, and I know most enterprises do have a component of bare metal. However, part of this transformation is about moving to the cloud. What we now see is that every cloud provider has embraced flash. Amazon went early with flash instances, their i2 instances, but they've also moved to having most of their instances support locally attached flash. With most databases, Aerospike is no different. There is a system that allows you to also persist to other storage tiers in the cloud, such as EBS and Amazon. But also systems like Rackspace, SoftLayer, all of these systems have sophisticated flash offerings. And so any cloud provider you move to today is going to have a set of flash drives and a flash offering that provides really an amazing benefit over trying to use RAM. Google Compute Engine and Google's new cloud initiative also deserves a very specific call out because they're the cloud provider that has specifically made that NVMe technology available to direct to consumers. And if you've been following along in the cloud wars, Google is making a strong statement these days that they are the provider that can get you to some pretty amazing results versus Google. Aerospike, of course, as an independent software provider, we like the competition that is happening in the cloud place and suggest that you should be using an independent database so that you can be multi-cloud or private-public as you see fit for your business. Finally, we also find at Aerospike that containerization and virtualization, as Chuck said, is an important trend. And we work well with all of those systems because as a clustered and flexible database, bringing online new instances is something that we can do very well. And I suggest that that kind of feature is one that you look for, one where operationally you can simply add and remove nodes to your cluster under operational loads. So hopefully that gives you a few concrete examples of how Aerospike, but also NoSQL, can leverage into your environment and really provide an acceleration to some of your business practices. Again, finally, the overall idea is find those new use cases, enable them to select internet technologies so that they have the advantage of the best set of tooling for their environment. But don't neglect your old legacy systems. Those are your settlement systems. Those are your business models. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Now we're on to our final speaker today, George Corrajedo, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Redpoint.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you all for attending. I'm going to maybe bring us out of the tech just a little bit and try to bring us to an example. It's an example of the kind of thing that we're doing today with clients. And I just want to set a little context. I think the discussion here has been really, really interesting. Chuck had some really great concepts around the crown jewels of data and modernizing that core. We work with a lot of companies, both old and new, that need to modernize that core. And what we find is that traditional companies need to modernize, need to accelerate, where the newer companies, the born in the cloud companies, have some of the issues of their own, where a lot of their infrastructure has all been built up with code. and eventually that becomes a little difficult to manage. The other part of it is that we've talked a lot about core systems, databases, etc. But what we want to talk about is not that. What Redpoint does is that we process the data. We're all about making sure that the data that sits in those systems are of the best quality, that they're curated to satisfy business purposes and solve business problems, to enable analytics, and so on. So this is a little example, and it's very much an example of what we do here. There were some interesting quotes out on the web I saw the other day of kind of predictors of things to come, and one of them was your home will shop for you. Well, we've already got a little bit of that with things like Nest and others, but imagine now you come home and you get home from work and you open your door, and as you cross your front door, you've broken an invisible geofence that alerts your refrigerator that you've just walked in, and it says, "Welcome home." That's very nice. Seems like a simple enough trick, but it goes a little bit further, because what it does now is it says, all right, what is, the concept of the refrigerator as a hub is what can I do to streamline and reduce the friction of your life? Well, how about if I recommend some recipes that are based on a number of items here, a number of dimensions, right? Number one is, what's the inventory in your refrigerator? Number two, what are your preferences? What are the kinds of dishes that you and your family like to eat? Number three, how long does it take to cook? And number four, what's the caloric intake for those meals? Now, that may seem like lots of data from lots of places, but in fact, it's a fairly easy thing to do if you do something like have a subscription, a food subscription to someone like, say, Whole Foods or Safeway or whoever you shop with, and then connect your data with perhaps Fitbit information that would indicate what your level of activity was for the day and the fitness goals you might have. So in just those few moments, from walking from your front door to walking up to your refrigerator, the refrigerator has helped you or has given you enough information to make a very quick decision about what you might do next to feed the family, live within the fitness goals that you're trying to get to, and so on. And what this is an example of that digital transformation that Chuck had mentioned. I know it's an overused term like many in technology, but it is very much an example of that type of transformation where you've got devices, you've got lots of different places and points where you might interact with a brand, and the key for it to be a successful interaction is that it's relevant, it's contextual, it's timely, and it does reduce the friction of your life. So now, one of the things that Microsoft has done and talks about is that there's kind of four pillars to digital transformation. One of them is customer engagement, another one is employee engagement, another one is security, and so on. Redpoint really focuses on enterprise customer engagement. And we focus on that not just from a marketing perspective, but really from a complete engagement perspective. Because as you saw in the previous example, I guess there's an element of marketing to that, but the fact is that's really about just day-to-day living and how can I be an assistant in that day-to-day living. Certainly, that will drive a better brand experience, that will drive greater consumption, a bit more effective consumption through the supermarket, but it is really designed to improve the moment rather than just sell you something. And that really has to happen across all dimensions of the business that are customer-facing. In order to achieve that, you've got to have a fairly robust platform on one end that can ingest data from any source, format, structure, cadence, lack of structure, whatever it may be, and transform that data into quality linked data. Because, it's one thing to have hardware infrastructure, whether in the cloud or on site or whatever it might be, but the effectiveness of this type of activity all depends on how good the data is, how prompt is the data, how recent is the data. And that's what our technologies, what Redpoint technologies really do, is ingest data from any sort, format, structure, lack of structure, any cadence, absorb it, clean it, link it, and then maintain those links over time so that we can resolve identities across anonymous to known. We can resolve contact graphs so that we know that it's George Corhado who lives in Wayland, Massachusetts, and has this car and this device and this refrigerator and this phone and so on. And this is how we talk to George, and this is how George wants to talk to us. And for an organization to be able to do that in a seamless way, this modern infrastructure, this modern core that Chuck was talking about, has to be in place. What Redpoint does is not the database systems. It's more the processing, the curation of that data, the pruning and cleaning of that data that will allow you to then have the most precise view of a customer, of a patient, of a member, of a donor. Whatever that relationship is you're having with the public, then we help you have a very, very accurate relationship with them. We provide a broad set of capabilities around ELT, ETL, data quality, integration and matching, identity resolution, master key management so that you can track relationships over time between people. Healthcare is a very good example where you might have a member of a healthcare organization, but you have adult children that actually assist the older parents in buying their health care, or they may have different roles in that caregiving. Similarly in insurance and lots of other organizations where it's not just one person, there's relationships that are all relevant to that account. Lots of web service integration and so on. So there's lots of technology that's involved here. But what we're talking about here is speed, is ability to process data and to scale it, right? And so we use a lot of the modern technologies, but there's a lot of hype and a lot of noise that happens with these technologies. Big data has been pounded into the sand as a term that is relegated to meaninglessness right now. Hadoop, similarly, there's a lot of these terms. At the end of the day, there's two things we think about when we talk about scale, is that, number one, certainly speed matters, right? And you've all heard about Hadoop MapReduce and Apache Spark as ways of operating on Hadoop. Spark right now, someone at a recent conference was running around saying, Hadoop is dead, long live Spark, and interestingly, I haven't had a conversation with a large organization lately that doesn't have Hadoop right at the core of their data infrastructure. But the point is that it's about scale and speed, right? And the speed, as you see, we can provide tremendous processing speed inside of a Hadoop cluster, 20 times faster than some of our competing technologies on MapReduce, and another 5 times faster than other technologies using Apache Spark. But perhaps the most important part of this is that all of that is done without a single line of code being written. And that's the scale part. Because when we think of data processing technology, and particularly these companies that are born in the cloud, much of what they've done has been done through coding. They hire really smart coders, they write a lot of code, they write a lot of customization, and then that's what they run on. Enterprises and legacy companies don't like that. They want to have systems that are reliable, they're consistent. You put these 3 boxes together, you're going to get the same result every time. It's not a matter of who's the best coder, do we get him on this job or that? And you eliminate bottlenecks in terms of leveraging and taking advantage of data. So this is one of the things where we really excel in terms of scalability. It's not just scaling in a distributed environment or a traditional environment, which we operate across both. It's really scaling in terms of scaling the people that can access and operate in this environment effectively. And with our application, they can cross the boundaries of traditional databases, NoSQL databases, Hadoop, all in one application, all in a drag and drop environment. And this is really important when we look at something like this. This is a slide that was put out by Intel. Intel, of course, is a big investor in Cloudera, so they've got this kind of modern view on data cleansing, data lakes, and BI. And the conventional wisdom is that, you take and ingest data into a Hadoop data lake, but you've got to move the data out to do master data management, which at the end of the day, legacy organizations, large enterprises, they're all about doing master data management. And in the digital transformation world, precision of data is critical, so that master data management is ever more important. But look at these time frames that are over here, 24 hours, 72 hours, 2 months to get a self-service BI portal. There's no reason that those are acceptable time frames, but this is conventional wisdom and state of the art, according to Intel. What we believe is that we look at the data lake as a very important point of data ingestion. Again, ingestion of data from any source, format, structure, lack of structure, any cadence, any type, streaming, non-streaming, whatever it may be. But what we do is we actually do all of the master data management, the keying, the matching, the data quality, the address standardization. We do it all inside the data lake. We do it natively at the document level, which means that you do not have to employ Hive tables or format data into tables. It's all in the native document layer inside of Hadoop. And what that does is it gives us incredible performance and scalability, as big as you can scale your Hadoop cluster. It's a very light touch application, so it works through Yarn, a pure Yarn integration, and it's very, very light touch, leaves no residue on your data nodes, and it's very powerful. And what that then gives you the ability is, as someone mentioned before, keep all your data. You never destroy data, but it ingests, and as needed, then you can bring all that data out to various data endpoints for solving business problems, whatever they may be, whether they're analytic business problems using your various BI tools, or customer engagement problems and customer orchestration, engagement orchestration, which we also do with some of our applications. But the key is having that modern data platform, that modern data layer sitting underneath it, so that you can enable that level of contextual, relevant and precise communication with your customers, your members, your donors, whoever it is you're trying to manage a relationship with as a brand. So, what really makes us different is that we really focus on both ends of the spectrum in terms of the traditional companies and the new companies, and we bring a very broad, complete set of tools, very robust set of tools that have been evolved over numerous years, but do it in a modern context so that you have the robustness of a legacy application with the agility of a modern application on some of the new technologies. As we said, one application crosses all the boundaries of various data types. In one application, in one job, you can cross all these boundaries. The performance is phenomenal. We go up against the titans of this type of work all the time and beat them on a regular basis because nobody has the level of integration that we have into Hadoop. We've been ranked #1 for ease of use. We have lots of pre-built capabilities, and it is drag and drop, so no coding. And finally, it really allows a tremendous level of agility in that two-speed IT cycle, right? We get used a lot by business units rather than core IT. We give those business units that incredible agility around their data and managing their data. And with that, I invite you to stop by our website, download that benchmark that I referred to in the presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, George. At this point, we're going to move on to questions from our viewers today, and the first question is for Chuck. Chuck, you talked a lot about IoT and how that should be what scares us all about the need for speed, agility, and scale, but isn't that really more of a 5 to 10 year out problem?
Oh, absolutely not. And the examples I gave, those are happening right now today. And what we're seeing, and I think it was George and Brian were talking about it as well, these applications and use cases are springing up day after day. And what's coming is, in probably about 1 to 2 years, this massive avalanche of data through IoT. And it really should scare everybody. And so you got to figure out how to go modernize that core. And actually, I would just say to George and Brian, all three of us are kind of a compatible conversation set, because we could actually put all three of our products together, or three of our solutions together, to create a solution set.
That's right.
Funny.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Understood. Thank you, Chuck. Brian, our next question is for you. How would you use Aerospike and machine learning together?
Sure, a great question. We do have a few customers doing that, and as I mentioned, that you have to write some decision-making or use a decision-making engine. Many people these days look at tool sets such as Spark, as was mentioned before, for streaming machine learning, or a number of the other libraries that are currently available. So you need a small amount of recent data. Think of it as a cache. Think of it as an operational data store. You also need a set of models that may be changing fairly rapidly depending on the kind of libraries you're using. Those then inform either the customer experience or not. So this would be the case where if you have a team that is thinking about applying machine learning, they need to look at the libraries, they need to look at Spark or some of the other solutions. They need to look through their historical data in their analytics tier and then figure out how much data they need on the front side. And it's all very practical and it's all doable.
Understood. Thank you, Brian. George, our next question is for you. How does the Redpoint approach compare to data wrangling?
Thank you. The Redpoint, there's a lot of, it's another overused term around data wrangling. I'm not sure technically what that entirely means. It's a way, it's a way of imagining that you're pulling all your data together. But there's a big difference between, data wrangling in some loose way to support analytics and really precise data curation that's done both for analytics and for operational purposes. So, for example, in healthcare, data wrangling's interesting, but it's really not going to satisfy HIPAA requirements for precision and quality of data and accuracy of linkage and matching. Similarly, when you're, standing in front of your refrigerator, you want to make sure that I'm getting something that I am interested in as opposed to something that my neighbor might be interested in. So in this world of digital transformation, data accuracy, data precision is paramount. And I would say that, that these terms of data wrangling and others are interesting, but you need precision to have that type of impact that the digital transformation world promises.
Understood. Thanks for clarifying, George. Okay, Chuck, back to you. Chuck, can you tell us about some of the key pitfalls to avoid when modernizing your core infrastructure?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of more around the cost model that I talked about. When people calculate TCO, they generally do that at the front end of a project to figure out what that cost structure is going to look like over the lifespan. The big issue, and the one we see a lot, is that once they do that initial TCO, they never go back and never really take a detailed look at it. They just kind of think, oh, it's on, it's running. They may do a spot check in year 1 or 2, but generally speaking, the problem with the issue that I identified around these tier 1 databases, and as Oracle said, 80% of them still running on this antiquated gear, is that they're not adhering to the normal kind of 3-year refresh cycle. So a lot of these things are getting, 5+ years, and that's where all those costs kind of come in. That's probably one of the biggest pitfalls I think we see, is just people don't do the analysis to go build the justification with the business around making that investment to do the modernization.
Understood. Thanks, Chuck. Brian, our next question is for you. Would you recommend using Aerospike for blockchain in financial services?
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting question. I think the idea of blockchain, to talk about it for a minute, is a great example of this kind of new workload that demands a different kind of database. Blockchain is somewhat controversial. I don't know if it's going to stick. As a database guy and not a financial guy, whether a blockchain-based public ledger makes sense in different settlement situations, I can't say. But what I do see is that from a database perspective, this is the kind of technology that enables openness, and it does so at a great database cost. In order to validate a blockchain against this public record of transactions, you need to be able to seek very quickly through a cryptographic cycle, essentially a chain. That's the chain in blockchain. And determine whether the statement being made, let's say I have $5, whether you, in fact, do have those $5 by stepping through the transaction and set of blocks. And it does turn out that that kind of problem is exactly the kind of problem that you would not consider using a SQL database or an old relational database to do. It's a new kind of relationship where the relationship of a transaction is determined by these new cryptographic principles. And that's exactly the kind of technology that some of these new internet startups are using to gain an advantage on some of the traditional enterprises, and thus a wise enterprise is looking very carefully at. So we work with some of the blockchain people for that exact very reason. But really, it's a model for what all of the interesting use cases that could be applied from these new technologies.
Understood. Thanks, Brian. George, our next question is for you. How does Redpoint support machine learning?
Thanks, Brian. The Redpoint provides so you saw an architecture that was data, insight, and action. And what Redpoint does is provides an inbuilt machine learning engine that not only does traditional machine learning and building predictive models for a variety of purposes, it does it as it's processing data and building data linkage and building databases and that kind of thing. So it's very efficient as it streams data in, it can process it. But the other part is that the machine learning that we utilize is optimized machine learning. So what does that mean? That means that, machine learning is a way of predicting. It's largely or traditionally, I would say, using things like neural nets to predict an outcome. And what we do is we actually generate lots and lots of those particular types of models, but then use them or run them in a simulator that then is trying to optimize against the fitness function. So it's a very effective way of allowing the technology to learn in an unattended way and then align it with your business strategy. If you think of strategy being reflected in the metrics that you're trying to either maximize or minimize in your organization, you can make that the fitness function, line up the machine learning to figure out what will drive that fitness function in the direction you want it to go, and let the technology do it at speed and scale, and do it very effectively. And it's not necessarily a black box. You can always test it. You can always compare it and test it against other ideas. But it's a very powerful way of driving those metrics in a very high-speed business environment.
Understood. That is all the time we have for questions today. We apologize that we were unable to get to all your questions, but as I stated earlier, all questions will be answered via email. I'd like to thank our speakers today, Chuck Wenner, Senior Director of Global Technology, Unified Compute Platform at Hitachi Data Systems, Brian Bolkowski, co-founder and CTO of Aerospike, and George Corrajado, CTO and co-founder of Redpoint. If you would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, please use the same URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived, and you will receive an email tomorrow once the event is posted. Plus, if you would like a PDF of this presentation, you can click on the resource icon at the bottom of your console. Now, as we stated earlier, just for participating in today's event, someone would win a $100 American Express gift card, and the winner today is Rachel Yang. Rachel, we will be in touch via email so you can claim your prize. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes